We need to have a look at this machine. It's a 301 lock stitch machine, and it only does a straight stitch. It's the most commonly used machine in the apparel industry. So I'm going to actually go over the different parts of the machine and then call out the areas of safety that you're going to need to take care when you're actually sewing with this machine. So there are a lot of areas where you could get your hand stuck in and things like that, and you just want to make sure that you're taking all the precautions that you can with this machine. It's very heavy, it's made of iron, steel, and you just want to be careful when you're opening things up and looking at it that you're taking great care, because the motor moves very fast, and I don't have a presser foot or needle in yet, but I'm going to show you how fast the motor goes when we get to the close-ups here. So just some other things you should know. On my machine, I have a separate light here, which I'm actually going to remove. If your machine or the school you are at has lights on their machine, sometimes they're coming out of the back of the table and over this way. I also have thread on this machine, which I'm going to remove. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of this stuff. I also want you to understand that while I'm discussing all of the different parts of the machine is not plugged in and it is not turned on. So especially take care when we're going to be installing the presser foot and the needle. We don't want to have any power going on in the machine itself. So the first thing we're going to look at is underneath the machine, and understand that this machine sits in a table, and below the table is where some of the parts that you're going to be using, and we'll get to those in close-ups in just a minute. So there is a presser bar that you use with your knee to actually raise and lower the presser foot, and then you have the foot pedal that actually powers the machine to go and to sew. So just be aware that it sits in a table like this, and there is a bath of oil underneath this that the sewing machine actually sits in. And that's not something that you actually need to be looking in all the time, because that's one of the safety concerns that I will be pointing out. So let's start with that, and I'll discuss all of the other areas. We'll start with looking at the inside of the machine itself. Okay, so now I've repositioned the sewing machine, I've removed my light and the thread, and now I'm going to prepare to actually open this up. So you need to understand that this is very heavy. If you do need to open this up, I would suggest having a partner nearby to help you, especially when you're going to be closing it. So also, if you think you have lost a needle in here and you're in school, I would suggest discussing opening. Also, if you're in a school environment and you think you've lost a needle or pins in the bath of oil, consult your instructor before opening this up so that they are aware that you need to get on the inside. So one of the things back here that you need to be aware of is this post right here. Mine actually comes out, and I'm going to put it back there. This post is where the machine is actually going to rest on once we open it up, because it's going to swing backwards, and it will rest right on this post. If you don't have a post, you need to find a post or some sort of mechanism to actually rest the machine on. Otherwise, the machine is going to fall flat back onto the table, and it may roll off of the table, and you don't want that to happen, because it will damage the floor, it will damage the machine, and it could actually hit somebody on the other side, and we don't want that to happen. So take care when you're opening this. So I know I'm doing it by myself, but I have a lot of experience behind me, so I know how to lift it up. I've actually locked the wheels on my machine so it doesn't move, and I know how to lift it up to get it to rest on this piece. So I'm actually going to do that right now, and then I will cut away to close-ups of the inside. Okay, so this is the bath of oil that the machine itself sits in. This is attached, it is attached to the table. And you can see there is a mark here for low and high, and those marks indicate low oil or high oil, and right now I'm actually sitting right in between, so that's pretty good. The other thing that you should look for in the oil is how clear it is, and this is actually a pretty good color. Oil is naturally a very light yellowish color, so this is actually looking pretty good. If it starts to get brown, well, you're going to need to remove all of the oil, drain the oil, and then put new oil in. So this little mechanism here is actually a mechanism which draws oil from the bath up into the machine to keep all the parts inside the machine itself oiled and lubricated. So this other piece here, this is a piece that moves up and down when you move your knee lever to raise and lower the presser foot. So this actually pushes a bar in the inside, which actually lowers and raises the presser foot. And then over here we have another, this is a wick that actually pulls oil up here to lubricate this bar, the inside of this bar, which turns one of the cranks. So these are just some of the parts that you actually just kind of need to be aware of, that they are there. Now I will point out one of the areas, pins will probably get dropped in here in through the crevice between the machine and the table. So they'll probably get in here, and it's, you know, pins are a dime a dozen, so it's not that important that you get down here and get all of your pins. You know, if you have a home, if this is a machine that's at your home, you may just want to check that once a month. This other area that's right here is actually the area that does not have oil in it. You will actually need to be reaching under here through the hole with your hand to actually insert the bobbin. And the bobbin case is right over here, and we'll have a closer look at that in just a minute when we get ready to insert the bobbin. So just be aware that these areas, you know, you really shouldn't need to open up your machine, but these should be areas of concern. So this area here is probably where you'll lose a lot of needles or pins, which you'll be able to find pretty easily while you're putting your bobbin in. You may drop your bobbin case if it's not going in just right, so you can usually feel around in there freely with your hand on this side, and it's not going to be in any trouble. But you do need to be aware of the level of oil that is in your machine. So now I'm going to go ahead and close this up, and I'm going to bring the camera back to full size, and I'm going to show you how to put this back onto the table. Okay, so I'm ready to bring the machine, or sometimes we'll call it the head, back into place here on the table. Again, I've got all my wheels locked. If you have wheels on your table, you want to lock them all so it doesn't move. If you have a partner nearby, ask them to come help you with it. It might slip out, and at least they'll be there to catch it. So again, really take care when you're putting this back into the table. No hands or fingers near this area at all, because if your finger is here and it slips, again, this is super heavy, it's iron, it's going to take the tip of your finger off, or it's going to break your finger. I know that sounds scary, but it can happen. So just understand that you need to take great care. So I'm going to do this with both hands carefully. Pull this back and set it down very gently. And there it is. It's setting back nicely in place. So now let's move on to the other areas of the machine. Okay, so in this area, the back side of the machine, there are a few parts that are very important. So this here is the hand wheel, this narrow part, and you can turn it, you should always turn it toward you, and it can be turned. Now on some machines, when they're off or when the presser foot is down, this is very difficult to turn. So if you have to use this with care, but you shouldn't really need to use this a lot once you get comfortable with using the machine. Never have your hand here while it's sewing, because it will actually grab your finger and turn it around. Now I have this plastic piece that's sitting here, and this is actually covering the belt. And if I can swirl this around a little bit, there's a belt here that goes down to the motor, and I'll show a close-up of the motor in just a second. So this goes down to the motor turns, and the belt glides with it, and it actually turns this piece, which actually turns the feed dogs and the needle. And so that's where you can't see it because it's a protective cover, and hopefully all of your machines at school or at your home will have this. So the other areas here, this is the bobbin winder area. So we would put a bobbin on this post and lock it. These are the tension guides for the thread for the bobbin, and that's very important. When we make a bobbin, it has to go through these tension guides. Okay, so moving forward moving away from the back, this here is for our stitch length, so we can change this for our different stitch lengths, and there is an exercise for your stitch lengths. This here is the reverse lever for bar tacking. And then this is just a little window. Actually, while you're sewing, you should see a bubble of oil, and that means that the oil is actually getting all the way up here, which is a good sign. Moving over here, this is a post. This is a thread carrier. This is also another thread carrier, and down below another thread carrier. This piece here is our tension discs and our tension adjustment dial. We really shouldn't need to adjust too much of our tensions, but of course once we get into different exercises with different thicknesses of fabrics and threads, then we will be adjusting this, and I will discuss that in an exercise about some of the tensions. Usually you don't want this all the way on. What I tell students, the best way to start is start your tension guide, even with the post, and then tighten it up from there. And of course, I have a little exercise for troubleshooting your tension. On the other side of this, we have a hook here, which our thread will go back around. And then up here, we'll take our thread up here to this piece. And this piece here is called the take-up lever, and that's very important to get your thread in there. You won't get any tension on your sewing if you don't have it in there. So here's another thread guide, and then a thread guide, and then another thread guide. And then here we would have the needle and then the presser foot. Now there's some stuff here on the top that I need to move the camera over so we can see that, and I'll talk about that. Okay, so here we have the throat plate, and then the door to the bobbin, and then these are our feed dogs. And these are the feed dogs that actually pull your fabric through the machine. It's the only part of the machine that actually moves the fabric. So these need to be in good condition. So your throat plate here has some markings. Sometimes you won't have any markings, but you have a marking each line. On that line is the measurement of seam width. So from the needle here, this is where the needle will go. From that needle, this line is 1/4 inch. From the needle, this second line is 1/2 inch. And then there's 3/4 inch and 1 inch. And if you need this one, you can assume that it's 1/4 inch, 1 1/4 inch. So just understand that you will actually need to measure from your needle, and once we get the needle in here, I'll show you that. You will need to measure from your needle to make sure that these measurements are actually correct. If they're not correct, you will need to make an adjustment or mark on here for what those are if you're going to be using these as your guides. So I've plugged the machine in. I'm going to show you these feed dogs working really quick, just so you see how fast the machine actually works. So that actually goes very fast. So this is the reason that we take great care when there is anybody around and they're sitting at this table. First of all, if they don't know how to sew or use this machine, they shouldn't be sitting at the machine. However, you will need to take care when you're inserting your needle and your presser foot that the machine is off and sometimes even unplugged. Now this door can help you install your bobbin So your bobbin case, you can pull this back, and then down here, right over here into this side where my finger is going, that's where the bobbin will go. And I will try to get a camera in here so you can see how we're going to be installing that bobbin. So that's all you need to know about the top part of the machine. Let's have a look at the underside. Okay, so this is the foot pedal that you will push in a forward motion from the top of your foot, the ball of your foot, and this actually makes this machine sew. So while you're sewing along, also know that if you need to stop on a stitch, you're getting carried away. If you push back fast on your heel at the base of the pedal, it will stop right on that stitch. Okay, so this is the knee press, and this should be adjusted to actually hit the side of your knee as you're sitting in your chair, and you just press it to the right to raise and lower the presser foot. And this might take some getting used to if you're used to a home machine, but once you start using this, you will never want to go back to raising and lower by hand. Okay, so this here is my motor. This is the motor that actually powers the sewing machine. And this is called a servo motor with variable speed. And I can actually slow it down by turning this stitches per minute. And it will actually slow it down or speed it up. And I usually keep it on kind of like a medium speed, just so you know. So if you're going to buy a machine, this usually costs a little bit more. Regular motors are not really that expensive, but I opted for this because I just like the variable speed. And over here we actually have the motor part. This is the part that carries the belt, which I talked about before, and this is the belt that comes up from the top and goes down here. The motor carries the belt around, and then the belt actually powers the machine. So just be aware of that, and I'll give you a really quick look at the back of the motor. Okay, so this is the back of the motor, and you actually can't see the inside, but again, this is the belt area. You should never put your fingers in here unless everything is completely turned off and unplugged. I have a plug here, and this is actually where I plug that light into, which is nice. And this is for reversing the motor, which is, you would probably never need to do that. So this is just kind of what the back of the motor is. I just wanted you to see that. Again, this is a servo motor, which if you're planning to buy a machine is a little bit more expensive, but if you need the variable speed, it's an option. Okay, so I also want to mention one of the knobs on the back of the machine. You should have a knob that looks like this, and you can move it up and down. And what that does is that it lowers and raises the presser foot, and it will keep the presser foot up there. So if you're not inclined to use the knee press, then you can use this, although you want to remember that you did that and put this down before you sew. Sometimes when you have this up and you use the knee press, it gives you a false sense that this is actually dropped, and you go ahead and sew, and then you have problems with the machine. So just understand that you have to remember that you're using this knob. Also, you can use this to keep it up when you place the presser foot on, and also the needle, so that helps you. But just remember to put it back down in the down position. Okay, so we're getting ready to wind a bobbin, and we first need to thread the machine to actually wind the bobbin. And there are a couple very specific things you need to know. So first of all, the machine usually comes with a thread holder, and there are usually two spots where you can put thread. It doesn't really matter which side you put your thread on, and then there are also these little holes that are thread carriers. It doesn't really matter which side you put it on or which carrier. But what's usually the case is the thread that's closest to the bobbin will be placed here, and then this thread will remain on the sewing machine, and bobbins will be continually wound as the sewing machine operator is sewing. That's an option for you. And then the other thread would be placed closest to the needle. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use this thread, and we'll look up here. I'll turn this a little bit more. There are two little thread carriers right through here. We actually want to make sure that it's going up straight from the thread up into those carriers this way. So I'm just going to get this started, and at the beginning, since we're just doing a bobbin right now, we're not threading it, I'm just going to have one of these go in here. So we'll put this in here, and we'll take the thread, and we're going to get ready to put it into the tension guide for the bobbin. Okay, so now I'm actually going to insert the thread from behind here. The thread should come from behind and poking through, coming toward the tension discs. And I'll pull the thread through, and then I want to actually make sure that the thread goes in between the tension discs. Don't just pull it around like this. Even though that looks like it's in the discs, it's not. You will need to make sure that this thread goes in between. Sometimes you can open this up with your thumb or fingernail to make sure that that thread goes in between those tension guides. And then you'll want to pull it tight, and a lot of times you can do like a flossing motion to make sure it gets into those tension guides. If it's not in between these discs, you're not going to get a good bobbin. And now we'll take the end of the thread up toward our bobbin. Okay, so here is our bobbin, and you'll notice that on this bobbin has two different sides. It has a solid side. I'm running out of breath. Okay. So here's our bobbin, and if you look at the bobbin, it has two sides. It has a solid side, and then it has a side with holes on it. And the side with the holes is going to go toward the outside. When we actually insert this into our bobbin case, we actually want to see these holes on the outside. So this is the solid side, and I'm going to put it on to the hook. So there's a hole in here. You're going to actually put it here on the post. You'll insert right onto the post with the holes on the outside, and then make sure you push it all the way in until it clicks all the way in. Okay, let me take that off and I'll show you one thing. There is a spring that is right here, right underneath toward the bottom, and I don't know if I've turned the wheel so you can actually see this spring. And then I'll open this back up. So there's this spring that holds that bobbin on while it's spinning. So that's why it's important to get this in here, put this back on the post, push it all the way back until you can't get it on anymore. Don't be too rough with it. You don't want to break it. And then there's a ledge here that will stop the bobbin. So I'm going to put the bobbin onto the post, pressing over that spring, and now I've got it on with the holes on the outside. Then I'll take my thread, the end of my thread here, and instead of winding it around like this, I don't really like that method. The best method is to take the end of your thread and go on the inside of the bobbin and thread it through one of those holes to the outside. Okay, so it's going through one of those holes. And you can just hold on to this thread, and while it's winding, it will break off. Okay, so we're not ready to wind just yet. So make sure that your thread is through one of those holes. And then this little mechanism here, you need to push this in to lock it in. And I'll open that up. So this spring, there's a spring right here, or an arm, that actually is pushed between the top and the bottom of the bobbin, and this will slowly, as the bobbin is filling up, this will slowly move back until finally there's too much on the bobbin, and it will automatically open up and it will stop the bobbin from winding. So I've got the machine turned on. I'm going to close the bobbin in. I'm going to hold on to this, and I'm going to press my foot pedal, and we're going to create this bobbin. Now I'm going to stop for a second because right off the bat my thread broke, which is great. That's what you want it to do. Now when you wind this bobbin, as I went slow in the beginning, and I'll show you. So this is slow. We really want to wind at a pretty fast rate because that will increase the tension on our bobbin, which we want a really good tension on the bobbin. So let me go full blast here. I'm holding the foot pedal all the way down. So there we have it. Our bobbin is done. It automatically popped out and we stopped the sewing machine. And I've got my snips and I'm just going to snip that off and then I can pull this off. And look at how nice that bobbin is. One of the things that you do want to check is, I call this a squishy test. I just kind of like to push in here, make sure that it's got a good density of thread in there. If it's too squishy, that's not a good bobbin. So this is very dense, which is good. So that will give you a good tension on your bobbin. Okay, so here's our bobbin that we just wound. And then this is our bobbin case. Now there are a couple of things that you need to know about the bobbin case. So first of all, there's a little door hinge here, and that's for you to grab onto when you insert it into the machine and when you take it out of the machine. The other thing is there is a tension spring up here, and you really shouldn't need to adjust this spring. There is 2 screws here for adjustment. If you ever need to loosen or tighten it, you really want to use this screw here, and you can get your fingernail in there and just kind of twist it just a little bit just in case. But I will show you what the proper tension for your thread once you get your bobbin in there. So the other thing is there is a post in here which you're going to insert the bobbin onto, and then we will pull the thread through this little slit here up to the spring on the top, and then we'll kind of pull it and shimmy it underneath the spring here so it comes out at this spot. All right? So the proper way to put this in is, this is the way I like to do it. So I see this cutout here. I like to put that at the top. And then the bobbin thread should be coming off this way. So it should be at the counterclockwise motion. So at that point, we know we're getting everything laid out correctly. So I want to see the holes on the outside of the bobbin. So once I've got everything laying the correct way, then I like to put the bobbin into the bobbin case. Then I will turn it around to where that slit is, right here, and I will grab the thread that's coming out and I will pull it up until I get to that slit, and then I will pull it through that slit. And then with some tension, try not to break your thread, you're going to just pull and try to pull that right under that spring. You see it clicked under there, and then I want to click it one more time so it's right in the middle. So it is right in the middle of that little spring where those teeth are, and it's coming out. Now, this is the part that's kind of hard to show on camera, but I want this to come out smoothly, right? With the weight of the bobbin in the case, it should just come out with that weight, and you can see it kind of coming out. It shouldn't come out easy, but it should come out very smoothly, and it should still feel like there is some tension. If you're picking it up, right, and the whole case comes with you, you might have, your tension may be a little bit tight. So just be aware of that. So now, how do we put this in the machine? So when you look at the bobbin case this way, you can see the thread here, and you've got your tail coming out. You want to look at the spring hinge here. It should be going horizontally when you place it into your machine. And the thread should be hanging over to the left, because we're going to take this and we're going to insert it horizontally into the machine. Okay, so now just for this purpose, to show you how to install this bobbin case, I have opened up the machine from the table, because this is the area where you want your bobbin case to go into. It's going to click in here, and there's a little bit of a notch here. And we're going to look at the bobbin. I've got it horizontal here, horizontal to where it's going to go into. And you see this little notch that's up here, right here. And then you've got this notch cut out here. You need to line that notch up with that spot. So with my thread hanging over onto the left, I've got my hinge going horizontally. I'm going to set this inside here, matching that post. And everything is lining up. I've got this notch here. Everything is horizontal, and it's setting in there. There's one more thing you need to hear. You need to take your finger and you need to push it until you hear a click. That clicking noise means that the bobbin case has been installed correctly. Okay, so I also wanted to show you coming from underneath, where I talked about there's a spot where you can put your hand on. You'll get very good at this. So I've opened the door to the bobbin, and I'm going to show you. You can see the bobbin case as it's coming up. And I have everything in the same order. My thread is hanging over to the left. My hinge here is actually horizontal, and that part, that little hook, is also horizontal. So you'll have to use your finger and feel in here for that post. And this is good reason why you should have your machine turned off and unplugged. So you'll feel for that post. And remember, we're going to match that post inside this hole. Feel around until you feel that post slide in there. And then again, you want to push it till you hear that click. That's how you know the bobbin has been installed correctly. Okay, so now I wanted to give you another shot trying to get up underneath. So I'm sorry if the video is shaky, but I'm having to hold this with my hand. So there's the bobbin in correctly, and I'm going to try to take it out and try to show you how to get it in there coming up from underneath. So my hands are in here. I'm going to grab this by the post. See, I've got the post there, and now I can just pull it out. It comes right out. So now, again, I'm going to insert it, show you the bobbin case here. Horizontal, thread is over to the left. I've got that hook there, and there's the post, right? I'm going to line up the bobbin with the post. I've got it in there, and now I'm going to click it in. So now my bobbin is inserted correctly. Okay, so it's time to actually install the needle right before we thread everything. And we are going to install the shank here up into this part, up under here. And under here there's a hole that you can feel around in there, and that's where we're going to be putting the shank up. So now we want to have a look at the needle really quickly, just to remind you that there is an eye, right? That's what you can see through. And then on one side here, there is the scarf. That's the cutout, right? Let's see if I can get a bit better look at this. So you can kind of see that cutout. See if it will. There, that's better. So that is your scarf, okay? And this side is the side with the This is the side with the groove that you can put your fingernail in. So this side with the long groove goes over here on the left. The scarf side goes over here on the right. So if you're used to using a home sewing machine, you'd know that the eye, the groove, faces you. Not in this case. We're actually going to turn it to the side. So when we're looking at the sewing machine, we cannot see through the eye of the needle. The needle is actually kind of sideways. So we have to think about that while we're installing. So also, as if you've watched the needles, thread, and bobbin tutorial, you'd know that the home machines have a flat side to it, which helps you get it right, which helps you get it correctly inserted into your machine. Industrial machine needles do not. They're a solid shank all the way around. So we have to install this, and I'm going to get this up here, push it all the way up as far as it can go. And I'm going to I'm just going to hold it there. Now I can feel and I can see here that I've got it back where I can see that scarf. So I need to turn it to the side, and this has to be perfectly lined up. The eye of the needle has to be perpendicular with the hole that the needle is going in. So on this side, I should be able to see if I don't know if you can see that in here. The scarf has to be going, I can feel that cutout right here. And I'm going to turn it just a little bit more. And I'm just holding it tightly with my finger so it doesn't fall out. I can feel that scarf here, and I know that the groove is there. So once you get it right, then you're going to screw in, tighten this screw. Now you really want to tighten it snugly, and I know I'm twisting this around a lot. That's because I had the screw almost all the way out. And yay. That will just be edited out. Okay, but why did it fall out? It's a little crooked. Okay, so I know it looks like I'm tightening this in a lot, but that's because I had the screw almost all the way out. So once you get up there, one of the things that you will have to look at once you start tightening it, and you can see it here in the needle, see if I can focus that a little bit better. When you start tightening the needle, sometimes the screw, the tightening, twists your needle. So I'm kind of at an angle right here. So I need to loosen and I need to correct that. Otherwise, it's not going to sew correctly. And I'm sorry that my hand is in the way, but this is the way you're going to be doing it. So I'm just kind of loosening up a little bit, and I'm just twisting that needle back into the correct position, making sure it's not going to twist. We're looking good. Just going to tighten that. That feels good, nice and tight. Now everything is looking really good. So I'm actually going to do a close-up of the needle really quick, and I'm going to be holding the camera. Okay, so I just wanted to be able to give you a close-up of the needle, and there's, you can see the eye, you can see straight through it. And as we very carefully move around, we can see that shank there. We move up, you can see that slight cut out. That's the shank. And then I'm going to move around to this side, and if it will keep focus. And then we can see the front of the needle, and I'll run my finger through the back. There's the eye, and I can actually run my fingernail through on that groove. And again, the needle placement is actually sideways, so that the thread comes through this way and goes through the eye of the needle. Okay, so now that we've got the needle in, correctly, let's go ahead and put the presser foot on. And this is just the regular presser foot. So we've already got our screw in here. If you're a student in school, you will actually be taking the screw all the way out and then putting it back in. But if you have an industrial machine at home, you're going to leave the screw in just enough to be able to get this presser foot on. Now, this is right now the bar is in the down position, so you can either hold with your knee, lift this up to be able to put that on, or there's a lever in the back that raises it, that raises that bar. And that's what I'm going to do. So what you want to do is hold this with one hand. So hold that up as far as it will go, and then take your screwdriver and just go ahead and tighten that screw. And you want to tighten this pretty snugly. If you're doing a lot of sewing in one day, you will need to check the tightness of this screw periodically, because with so much vibration happening in the machine, sometimes this screw will loosen on its own, and then the foot will fall down, your needle will hit the foot, you break a needle. Just consider checking this every so often. So now we've got our needle in, our foot on. Let's go ahead and thread the machine. Okay, so now that we're ready to thread the machine, I'm just going to actually leave this thread in here and keep it here in the tension guide, even though that I don't have a bobbin ready to wind. I'm just going to leave this in here for the time being, and I'm going to use this other thread to actually thread the machine with. So just like the bobbin thread, I'm going to grab my end of my thread and I'm going to insert it into this hole here, this carrier, and then I will pull it toward the first post on the machine. Okay, so now we're ready to start threading our machine. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we have a nice clean edge on our thread. So your machine will have a post like this, and the posts at the top of the machine will be different depending on the type of the machine. Some will have a little disc that is up here. In that case, if you have the little tension disc that's up at the top, you're going to insert your thread from the back of the post through the bottom hole. Then you will grab onto that thread. You will loop the thread around and into the tension discs, and then into the top hole of this thread carrier. Now, some posts only have one hole, no disc and no other holes on it. In that case, you'll just insert through that hole and bring your thread down and go straight down into the first hole of this carrier here. So my post has two different holes. So if your post has two different holes, then you're going to come through from the back and insert the thread through the top hole first. Go ahead and pull that through. Then grab the thread by the end and loop it back around to the back so that your thread goes through the back of the second hole or lower hole. And you can pull that through. And then you'll have this thread carrier. Now, some machines on this thread carrier have two holes, which mine does. Some have three holes. You're going to thread each hole the same way. Now, some will be, if I can turn this, mine is at this point, some will be standing up, in which you'll need to come this way, and you will wind the thread around those holes going from the top to the bottom, the same manner that I do for this horizontal thread guide. So I'm going to take the thread and I'm going to put it straight down into that hole, grab that thread, the end of the thread, and bring it back up to the top and put it straight down into the second hole. And then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so now we're coming to this area. These are tension discs, just like the tension discs on the bobbin winder. So what we're first going to do is we're going to make sure we're going to get into this thread carrier here. So there is a spring, which you can attach it like that. You want to make sure it's in there, and that's so it stays into the tension. Now, don't just come around this way. Make sure, just like in the other one, that the thread is in there. You see how it's in the middle of the thread? You see how it's in the middle of the tension discs like that? That's where you want it to be. Then you're going to pull that thread around the tension discs. It's in there nice and tight. And you see this little spring here. We need the thread to go inside that spring. So bring the thread and loop the thread inside that spring so you can actually move that spring with the thread. Then you'll tuck the thread under this hook and then pull it up, going up toward the top of here. Okay, so now that your thread is up at the top of here, this take-up lever has a hole in it, or sometimes there will just be a slot for you to slide the thread through. You're going to take the end of the thread and you're going to thread it through that little hole or put it through the slot and pull it through. And it will fall down towards the other thread carrier. Then you'll need to get the thread into this carrier, and you can either click it through or feed it through the top. And the thread will be hanging down toward the needle now. Okay, so our thread is now hanging down toward the needle. We have a thread carrier here. There should be a thread carrier here, either a hole to insert it down inside or another little hook, which that's what this is here. So I'm going to get this thread now into the hook, and it's in the hook. Okay, so now I need to insert the thread into this little hole. And all of these little carriers and these holes where all the thread is going keeps the thread in very good position so you have good sewing. So instead of struggling trying to get this into the hole with my fingers, I'm actually going to use one of the tools I said for you to get, which is these tweezers with these nice little tips. And now I can insert that thread right into that hole and put some more there until it comes out, and I can pull this out. And now all I have to do is I have to thread the needle. I'm also going to use my tweezers to thread the needle. So, but before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I have a really clean cut edge. So I'm going to take my snips, make a quick snip, grab onto this thread, and remember, we thread the needle going sideways. Much easier to thread with the tweezers. So now there's one last step to threading the machine, and that is actually pulling the bobbin thread up from the bobbin. Now we've already got the bobbin in place. We just finished threading, so we're gonna actually pull that bobbin thread up now. Okay, so to get the bobbin thread from the Okay, so to get the bobbin thread up to the top, we actually need to make one stitch. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my presser foot because I don't want the feed dogs to run against the bottom of the presser foot. So I'm using the back lever instead of my knee at this point, but I'm going to remember that I need to put that lever back down. I'm going to grab my thread, I'll put it underneath that presser foot so it's going away, and I need to hold on to this thread. If I don't hold on to this thread, the thread may go down into the hole and not come back up. So I'm just going to put my finger on it here just so it doesn't leave. Then I'm going to hand crank my wheel on the right, and to get that needle to go down all the way down, and then bring the needle all the way back up, completely up to the top. And you're going to make sure that your take-up lever, and I'm going to veer up with the camera real quick. That take-up lever needs to be all the way in the top position. And then I'll put this back down so we can see at the needle. And at that point, you should see underneath, I'm going to zoom in here, that thread is now pulling through from that bobbin. And I can pull this thread up, and there's your bobbin thread. And I'm going to zoom out now. And I will just grab onto that thread. So now I have my needle thread, and I have my bobbin thread, two separate pieces, but I'm going to take both of these, I'm going to put them under the foot, and I'm going to put them toward the back, and then I will lower the presser foot. So now our machine is completely ready to sew. Okay, so now that we have the bobbin installed and the machine is all threaded and you have a good idea of what's going on with your machine, we need to talk about how you're sitting at the machine. Now, you should be sitting in a stable, sturdy chair. I was sitting in an office chair at the beginning of these videos with wheels, and that's not a good idea. So if you're at home, of course, you can choose whatever chair you want, but if you're in a work environment or a school environment, you really need to be sitting in a very stable chair so that you don't accidentally move around while you're sewing. That could be very dangerous. So my suggestion is that the table that you're sitting at should be actually level with your elbow about how you're putting the fabric into the machine. That's about the level you should be sitting at. So I'm just going, I know you're quite a ways away from me, but I'm just going to go ahead and sew. And I've got my foot pedal here, and then I've got my knee arm here, the lever that raises and lowers the presser foot. And you'll get used to this as time goes by. So I'm going to lift the presser foot. I'm going to put the fabric under the presser foot all the way, lower the presser foot, and then at this point you can actually sew. I like to actually put the needle down into the fabric, so I'm going to use the hand wheel here, and I'm going to turn that needle so it's all the way down. I just like to have the needle in the down position when I start. Of course, you can actually start with the needle up, but sometimes I feel that it tends to grab a lot of the bobbin thread, and then sometimes it will cause some wadding, and then you'll get into some trouble there. So that's why I like to put the needle in the down position. So I'm going to sew. And that was pretty fast, but you'll have to get used to using your foot pedal to actually control the speed of the machine. Now, I'm going to use a lever over here that I didn't really do a lot of talking about, and this is the reverse lever. And once you hit this, the machine will actually sew backwards. It will actually bring the fabric back. So I'm going to go ahead and sew, and then I'll backstitch, and you can see the fabric is coming back toward you. Now understand that this also takes a little bit of getting used to, but you'll get the hang of it. We'll usually backstitch like this at the beginning and the end of a stitch line. The other thing that I'd like to call out is the stitch length dial, which is over here, and you're actually going to have an exercise about using this dial and to count the number of stitches you are sewing with. So this dial on my machine goes from 0 to 5, the largest number being a very long stitch and the small number being a very small stitch. So it's very easy to turn the dial to the larger stitches. But if you can't turn the dial, or it's very difficult to turn the dial to a smaller number, depress the reverse lever and then you'll be able to turn it to a smaller number. So of course, now this is all the basics of the orientation for your machine. All of the other exercises are of course going to teach you to sew, but also how to become friends with your machine. If you don't know your machine very well or don't have a good relationship with it, well, you may have more troubles along the way. So I would suggest starting with the very basic exercises to get a real handle on how this machine works, how it moves, and how you can control it. I want to wish you good luck with all your sewing projects here at Apparel Arts Academy, and I want to thank you for choosing Apparel Arts Academy for your online sewing instruction.